Imagine for a second, just picture this. You've been preparing your entire life for this massive, monumental event.
Right.
It's the absolute defining moment of your identity, your freedom, your entire community. But on the exact morning this event is supposed to kick off, you're barred from entry.
Just completely locked out. Yeah.
Disqualified on a tiny technicality. And, you didn't do anything malicious. You were just dealing with the messy, unavoidable realities of human life.
The stuff you literally can't control.
Exactly. And suddenly, bam, the door slammed right in your face. And over 3,000 years ago, a group of people actually faced this exact crisis out in the middle of a barren wilderness.
They really did. It's a staggering moment.
It really is. Now, before we step out into that ancient sand, I just want to take a moment to address you, our listener, directly. I want to wish you a deeply blessed day and a wonderful guided week ahead. We're doing a deep dive today into some incredibly rich source material. We're looking at study notes and ancient texts from the Holman and NLEVA Study Bibles, specifically focusing on Numbers chapter 9.
Which is such a fascinating chapter.
Oh, it's packed. And our mission for this deep dive is to explore this really profound intersection of strict ancient tradition, practical human reality, and, well, what actually happens when an entire community has to navigate the world's most unpredictable journey.
Right, because to really get the weight of this crisis, we have to look at where these people are actually standing at this moment.
Paint the picture for us.
So according to the source texts, it's the first month of the second year since the Israelites' massive exodus from Egypt.
Okay, so they've been out for exactly 1 year.
Exactly 1 year. They are camped out at the base of Mount Sinai. And right at its 1-year anniversary, Moses receives this direct command to observe the Passover. So this is their very first wilderness Passover. Yeah, I mean, think about it. The original event happened back in Egypt, under the cover of night, right before they made this desperate run for it.
Right, it was totally rushed.
But now they're being told to recreate it, but this time as a free, newly formed nation.
Which means this isn't just like a dry history lesson or a regular holiday. I mean, this is basically their Independence Day.
Yeah.
It's their religious foundation and a national census all kind of rolled into one big event.
Oh, it's non-negotiable. The text outlines these incredibly strict statutes and rites that they have to follow to the letter.
Right. The date is set in stone, the 14th day of the first month, right at twilight.
Yep.
But then we get this legal crisis. A group of men approaches Moses and Aaron, and they have a huge problem. The text says they are ceremonially unclean because they touched a dead human body.
Right, and the study notes here give us some really crucial context about ancient Near Eastern purity laws. In this specific camp, if you came into contact with a corpse, you were ritually impure.
Which, I mean, touching a dead body is pretty unavoidable sometimes.
Totally. And it's important to understand that in this framework, God represents absolute life and vitality, right?
Okay.
So death is the ultimate opposite of that divine presence. So being ritually impure wasn't necessarily a moral sin. I mean, people had to bury their family members.
Yeah, you have to take care of your dead.
Right. But it was this state of being that temporarily disqualified you from stepping into the sanctuary space or, participating in these sacred communal rituals. So if you were impure, you were absolutely barred from this Passover.
I mean, think about waiting your whole life for a monumental family reunion or this massive graduation ceremony, and then the morning of the event, you come down with something and are barred from entry on a technicality.
Heartbreaking.
It is, and I had to push back on this a little bit because looking at it from the outside, doesn't this highlight a massive flaw in having these incredibly rigid laws?
What do you mean?
Well, what happens when life just gets in the way? These guys didn't commit a crime. They were dealing with mortality, which is literally the most universal human reality there is.
Yeah, it's unavoidable.
It just feels like this legal system is completely disconnected from the messy reality of being a human being.
What's fascinating here is that the tension you're pointing out is actually the entire point of this narrative. Moses is suddenly presented with this massive systemic collision.
Right. The law says one thing, but reality says another.
Exactly. The rigid law clearly says no unclean person can participate. But the whole spirit of the community demands inclusion for these faithful guys. I mean, they ask Moses this deeply poignant question. They say, why must we be kept from presenting the Lord's offering at its appointed time?
They're really advocating for themselves. They're not just taking no for an answer.
They really are. And Moses does something incredible here. He doesn't just dismiss them, and he doesn't blindly enforce the rule book and say, sorry, rules are rules, go away.
He actually listens to them.
He does. He says, "Wait here until I find out what the Lord commands concerning you."
Oh, wow. So he's basically admitting, hey, the law as it's currently written doesn't account for your specific situation, and honestly, I don't know the answer.
Right. And the study notes, especially in the Holman Bible, they highlight this exact moment as the birth of biblical jurisprudence.
The birth of biblical jurisprudence. That's a great phrase.
Yeah, it's this idea that laws are actually evolving based on the real lived circumstances of the faith community.
Because suddenly, questions and these weird edge cases aren't just seen as like a nuisance or a rebellion.
Exactly. They were treated as this legitimate pathway to gain a deeper understanding of the divine will. It proves the law isn't just this closed, dead document that crushes people.
Right, it's responsive. And the outcome for these men is just a huge pivot because this question about a technicality actually results in a permanent institution of grace.
It really does.
The text establishes this totally new precedent. If anyone is unclean from a corpse, or, and this is interesting, they add a new category here, if they're away on a long journey, they get a delayed Passover or a second Passover. Exactly 1 month later, the 14th day of the second month.
Yeah, but here's the nuance, right? The grace was in the timing, not a watering down of the tradition, because they still had very specific conditions they had to meet.
Oh, absolutely. The source materials are super clear about this. If you observed this second Passover, you still had to eat it with unleavened bread and bitter herbs.
You couldn't leave any leftovers until morning.
Right, and you couldn't break a single bone of the lamb.
Which I love, because the unleavened bread wasn't just a dietary preference, you know.
Yeah.
It symbolized the extreme haste of their escape.
Oh.
They didn't even have time for bread to rise.
Right, it's visceral.
And the bitter herbs forced this physical memory of how bitter their slavery was. So the ruling is basically saying, look, we'll adjust the calendar for your human circumstances, but we will not compromise on the core truth of who we are. It's this perfect balance. But the NAA study notes bring in this really severe counterbalance to that grace.
Yeah, the penalty side of it.
Right. So this provision was explicitly for people who were unclean or traveling. But if you were clean and you weren't traveling and you just simply chose not to participate,
Just skipped it.
yeah, if you just chose to skip it, the text says that person must be cut off from their people.
Which sounds kind of like a polite euphemism, but in a desert tribe, being cut off is, well, it's staggering. We're talking excommunication, banishment. The NAA notes even clarify it likely meant divine execution.
Yeah, it's a lethal boundary.
I just struggle with how harsh that is. You have this beautiful grace for someone who touched a corpse, but an ironclad, potentially lethal penalty for someone who just decides to skip the dinner.
Well, you have to look at it through the lens of communal survival. In the ancient world, identity was entirely collective. It wasn't individualistic like we think today.
Okay, that makes sense.
So willingly skipping the Passover when you were totally capable of doing it wasn't just, skipping a church service or a potluck.
It was an act of rejection.
Exactly. It was a rejection of their core identity, a denial of their shared deliverance. It was a threat to the cohesion of this very fragile nation wandering in a super dangerous environment.
Apathy was basically toxic to their survival.
Right. The law drew an absolute line against apathy, even while it made all this room for people hindered by genuine circumstance.
And speaking of making room, here is where it gets really interesting. Because the text establishes a rule regarding the foreigner.
Oh, this is a huge detail.
It says the exact same rules applied to foreign residents, immigrants living among them who wanted to celebrate the Passover. The law made absolutely no distinction between the natural-born citizen and the immigrant.
One unified statute for everyone.
Exactly. If you want to participate in this defining story, the door is wide open to you, regardless of your bloodline.
And that detail sets up this massive historical echo that the Holman notes point out. This obscure ruling in the desert changed the course of national history centuries later.
Wait, really? How so?
So fast forward to the 8th century BC, the Israelites have conquered the land, built a temple, but then they split into these two rival kingdoms, the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah.
Okay, so they're fractured.
Deeply fractured. And the geopolitical situation is just horrific. The Assyrian Empire sweeps through the northern kingdom, and the Assyrians were brutal. Their whole strategy was mass deportation.
Right, they didn't just conquer, they literally ripped people out of their homes.
Exactly. They scattered them across places like Babel and Kuta just to systematically destroy their cultural identity so they couldn't rebel.
So you've got this shattered, traumatized refugee population whose identity is actively being erased.
Yes. But meanwhile, down in the southern kingdom, King Hezekiah is leading this major restoration in Jerusalem. And he wants to hold a massive, unifying Passover.
But there's a delay, right?
Right, the temple was in disrepair. The priests weren't ritually clean in time, so they couldn't do it in the first month. So what does Hezekiah do? He looks back at this exact legislation in Numbers 9.
Oh, wow. He uses the second Passover law.
He uses it as his legal precedent to delay the national celebration to the second month.
And he uses that extra month to send out messengers, inviting all those displaced, battered refugees from the north to come down to Jerusalem and participate.
Exactly.
I mean, that's incredible. A law made for a few guys with a purity issue in the desert becomes the exact legal foundation needed to reunite a traumatized nation centuries later.
It's a stunning example of how a singular act of making room for the marginalized can echo across history.
It really is, but I know the narrative here doesn't let us get too comfortable with this idea of humanity just brilliantly managing its own calendar.
Definitely not. The second half of this text introduces a completely jarring shift.
Yeah, we move from this meticulous, down-to-the-day scheduling of Passover dates to a reality where they had absolutely zero control over their daily itinerary.
All right, the timeline gets wild.
Yeah, let's unpack that chronological puzzle. The NAA study notes have this chronological table dating events from the end of Exodus through Numbers 10. And when you look at it, you realize the text in Numbers 9 is actually totally out of chronological order.
Right, which throws our modern minds for a loop because we expect history to read like a diary.
Day 1, Day 2, Day 3.
Exactly. But ancient authors prioritize thematic meaning over strict chronological sequence. So let's look at the dates in the source table. On day 1 of month 1, the tabernacle is set up.
Okay.
Then day 14 of month 1 is the first Passover we just talked about.
But if you go back to the very beginning of the book of Numbers, chapter 1, they do this massive census.
Yeah.
And that census didn't happen until day 1 of month 2.
Right. So the book opens in month 2, then jumps backward in time in chapter 9 to the middle of month 1.
And then it jumps forward again. The delayed Passover is day 14 of month 2. And the guiding cloud finally moves on day 20 of month 2.
It's all over the place chronologically. But the study notes explain that the author clustered these events thematically. By grouping the census, the purity laws, and the Passovers all together right before they finally march, the text focuses purely on obedience and preparation.
So it's basically saying that who these people are and their relationship with God is way more important than the exact sequence of dates.
Exactly. Which brings us to the actual mechanism of how they traveled.
Yeah, the guiding cloud in verses 15 through 23, the sources paint this incredible, striking visual.
It's very cinematic.
It really is. A cloud covered the tabernacle by day, and at night it had the appearance of fire. And the rule was like the world's most unpredictable GPS. Whenever the cloud lifted, they marched. Wherever it settled, they camped.
It was this continuous visual testament to the divine presence.
Okay, but let's unpack this, because living like this sounds incredibly stressful for you as a listener.
Oh, it would be a nightmare for a planner.
Seriously. The text says the cloud could stay for 2 days, a month, or a whole year. And when it lifted, whether it was high noon or 3 a.m., you had to pack up everything and go.
Right. Immediately.
Imagine living out of a suitcase with a flight that keeps getting delayed or moved up entirely at random. How did a society function without being able to plan tomorrow? You can't plant crops.
Nope.
You can't plan a celebration. It just completely strips away human autonomy.
It absolutely does. And that psychological toll is precisely the point. The journey wasn't designed for human convenience.
It was about submission.
Total submission. And the Holman and NAA notes give this brilliant literary insight here. They point out that this section about the cloud isn't just regular prose. It's actually structured like a poetic hymn or a marching song.
Oh, that's fascinating. A marching song to reinforce their reality.
Exactly. The phrase command of the Lord is repeated rhythmically over and over. At the command of the Lord they camped, and at the command of the Lord they set out.
It's hypnotic.
Right. It wasn't a travel log. It was a continuous day and night visual test of absolute obedience. The unpredictable movement forced the community to rely entirely on God's presence in the present moment, rather than their own strategic planning.
So if the clouds stayed a year in a miserable, barren desert, they just had to sit there and practice patience.
Even if their instincts screamed at them to keep moving.
And if it moved after 2 days, they had to pack up. Even if they were exhausted, they just had to follow.
Perfectly infallible guidance. But the cost was the total surrender of their own schedule.
Wow. Synthesizing everything today, this deep dive really shows a profound tension we still face. You know, you need rigid boundaries to maintain a community's identity, like the Passover rules.
Right, you have to define who you are.
But right next to that, you need the grace of the second Passover when life inevitably happens.
The balance of law and mercy.
Exactly. And all the while, you're trying to navigate a future you ultimately can't control, just like them following the cloud.
It's a remarkable portrait of faith.
It really is. I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder today. We started by imagining you being barred from a celebration and watching a foundational law bend to include you.
Yeah.
If this ancient, seemingly rigid community was willing to adapt its most sacred tradition just to include people marginalized by circumstance, how flexible are the unbreakable traditions or rules we hold on to in our own lives today when they end up excluding people? Do we defend the rule book, or do we have the courage to make room?
That's a powerful question to leave on. Thank you so much for joining us to explore these historical depths today, and goodbye.
And God blesses all of you, our listeners. We will see you on the next Deep Dive.